On October 17, 1777, a British general crossed a muddy field in upstate New York and handed over his sword. Behind him stood nearly 6,000 troops, the remnants of what had been one of the finest armies in the world, now prisoners of war. They had marched down from Canada expecting to crush a rebellion. Instead, the rebellion crushed them. By the following February, France had signed a formal alliance with the United States, and the entire character of the war shifted for good. In early 1777, anyone in London would have told you the American rebellion was nearly finished. The Continental Army had been pushed out of New York the previous fall, and Washington's worn-down troops were shivering in the New Jersey hills, plagued by desertion and expiring enlistments. Congress was printing money nobody trusted, and pleading with reluctant colonial assemblies for supplies that rarely showed up. Britain, meanwhile, possessed the world's most powerful military and a navy that dominated every Atlantic harbor. Parliament viewed the rebellion less as a threat than an inconvenience that would collapse once the colonists grasped they couldn't fight a modern European army. London wasn't worried, just impatient for it to be over. Nobody saw what was coming. The plan to finish the war was drawn up in London that winter. It looked elegant on paper. A British army would drive south from Canada along the Lake Champlain-Hudson corridor toward Albany, while General William Howe pushed north from New York City, and a smaller force under Colonel Barry Street Leger struck east through the Mohawk Valley. Together, the three columns would seal the Hudson corridor, cutting New England off from the rest of the colonies and starving the rebellion of supplies and coordination. Lieutenant General John Burgoyne campaigned hardest for command of the main thrust, a 54-year-old veteran, member of Parliament, and part-time playwright. His troops nicknamed Gentleman Johnny. Charming, ambitious, and convinced of his own brilliance, he traveled with a personal wine merchant, a portable writing desk, and his mistress. He pitched the plan directly to King George III and Secretary Lord George Germain, both of whom approved enthusiastically, and sailed for Canada that spring already certain of victory. In June 1777, Burgoyne assembled roughly 7,800 troops at St. John's in Quebec, about 4,000 British regulars, 3,100 German mercenaries from Brunswick and Hesse, plus Loyalist volunteers, Canadian militia, and several hundred Native American warriors. He also hauled along more than 130 cannons and a baggage train loaded with personal comforts. An army built for a victory parade, not a wilderness campaign. The early going seemed to confirm his confidence. On July 6th, his forces took Fort Ticonderoga almost without a fight, after British artillery was dragged to the summit of nearby Mount Defiance and trained down on the fort. The garrison fled in the night, abandoning cannons, supplies, and dinner still on the tables. King George reportedly burst into the Queen's chambers, shouting that he had beaten the Americans, while Congress reeled at the loss of a fortress everyone had considered nearly unbreakable. Instead of pressing south by water down Lake George, the faster and easier route, Burgoyne chose to push his army overland through 23 miles of dense forest toward Fort Edward, partly to keep up the appearance of an unstoppable advance. It was a disastrous call. General Philip Schuyler, commanding the American Northern Department, knew he couldn't beat Burgoyne in open battle, so he unleashed a scorched earth campaign instead. His men felled trees across every trail, destroyed bridges, dammed creeks into swamps, rolled boulders into mountain passes, and stripped the countryside of crops and livestock. A march that should have taken 2 or 3 days dragged on for more than 3 weeks, with Burgoyne's troops building dozens of bridges and a long log causeway through swampland, while hauling 130 cannons through mud that swallowed wheels whole. The further south he pushed, the more militia appeared from the woods to harass his foragers and supply wagons. Then came a disaster of a different kind. Native American warriors allied with Burgoyne's army killed and scalped a young Loyalist woman named Jane McCrae, who had been waiting to reunite with her fiancé among his troops. The killing became instant propaganda across the colonies, and men who had been sitting on the fence grabbed their muskets and headed north to fight. The alliance meant to terrorize the frontier was instead filling American ranks. By early August, Burgoyne's army was starving and his horses were dying, so he sent roughly 700 troops under Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum toward Bennington in what is now Vermont, hoping to seize cattle, horses, and supplies on the assumption the area was Loyalist friendly. That assumption was badly wrong. Waiting near Bennington was Brigadier General John Stark, with about 2,000 furious New Hampshire and Vermont militiamen. On August 16th, Stark's men attacked from several directions at once in brutal, close-quarters fighting. Baum was mortally wounded, and when German reinforcements arrived that afternoon, Stark and the Green Mountain Boys broke them too. By nightfall, Burgoyne had lost nearly 1,000 men, an eighth of his entire army, and gained nothing. The third prong of the invasion collapsed as well. St. Leger's force, meant to link up with Burgoyne near Albany, was stopped at Fort Stanwix and routed after Benedict Arnold marched west and tricked St. Leger's native allies into believing an enormous American force was approaching. Worse still, General Howe had decided to sail south and seize Philadelphia instead of marching to meet Burgoyne, severing the entire strategic logic of the campaign. Burgoyne was now advancing completely alone, with no relief in sight. Rather than retreat to Ticonderoga, he pushed across the Hudson River, cutting off his own escape route. A decision historians still debate as courage, arrogance, or simple denial. By mid-September, Burgoyne crossed the Hudson near the village of Saratoga, facing an American Northern Army dug in on Bemis Heights, fortified by Polish engineer Thaddeus Kosciuszko. General Horatio Gates now commanded between 12,000 and 15,000 men, swollen by militia, drawn in by the Bennington victory, against Burgoyne's fewer than 6,000, yet Burgoyne attacked anyway. The first clash came on September 19th at Freeman's farm, where Benedict Arnold convinced the cautious Gates to meet the British in the open woods, rather than wait behind the lines. The fighting raged for nearly 4 hours, with Daniel Morgan's riflemen picking off British officers at long range before the field changed hands repeatedly. The British technically held the ground by nightfall, but had suffered roughly 600 casualties, including many veteran officers, a victory that gutted the army that won it. 18 agonizing days followed. Burgoyne waited for reinforcements that never came, while American numbers kept swelling, and raiding parties picked off his sentries and burned his supplies at night. His men went on half rations, his horses chewed bark, and his Native American allies quietly melted into the forest. On October 7th, he sent roughly 1,500 troops to probe the American left flank in one last attempt to break through. The action that became the Battle of Bemis Heights. Gates ordered a full counterattack, and in the chaos Benedict Arnold, technically relieved of command after a bitter feud with Gates, rode onto the field anyway, rallying troops and leading charges with reckless abandon. He led the decisive assault on the fortified Bremen redoubt. His horse was shot from under him, crushing his leg in the fall, but the position fell, and Burgoyne's right flank collapsed. Brigadier General Simon Fraser, one of Burgoyne's most respected officers, was killed by a marksman's bullet while trying to hold the line together, and with his death, British cohesion broke entirely. That night, in pouring rain, Burgoyne ordered a retreat toward Saratoga, but American forces had already cut the roads north. Within days his army was surrounded on the heights above the Hudson, starving, out of ammunition, and under constant artillery fire. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne formally surrendered nearly 5,800 men to Gates under generous terms that let his officers keep their swords. The shockwaves reached Paris almost immediately. Benjamin Franklin had spent months urging France to back the rebellion openly, and Saratoga proved the Americans could actually win. On February 6, 1778, France signed treaties of commerce and alliance with the United States, sending gold, warships, and officers like the Marquis de Lafayette to Washington's side, and turning a colonial uprising into a global war. Burgoyne returned home in disgrace, blamed everyone but himself, and never received another command. Benedict Arnold, embittered by a leg that never healed and by watching Gates take all the credit, later tried to sell West Point to the British for £20,000, turning the hero of Bemis Heights into America's most infamous traitor.